So now that our render script is 100% complete, now that we have made special concessions for matting out objects when necessary, it is time for us to put together the render description files. Now we're going to have 4 different files, each describing a shot, shot 1, shot 2, 3, and 4. In this video, we'll be focusing on both shot 1 and shot 2. Now this will be a bit long, a bit tedious, not so much for shot 1 and 2, but shot 3, well, that's where things are really going to come to life. Now Steve's going to begin with shot 2. And the reason he's starting off with shot 2 is because shot 2 has some elements that are very easy to see, and it's very easy to follow along with what he's doing and why he's doing it. You may be thinking to yourself, wait a minute, but shot 1 is really pretty simple. It's just a camera panning across an audience that's cheering. Well, that's true, but there's quite a few different components involved with that first shot, which you'll see in just a few minutes. So, Steve, I shall hand it over to you.
Thank you. So I'm going to jump over to our projects folder. I'm going to create a new folder for saving our render descriptions into. So I'm going to first delete out these test description files that we created, and I'm going to create a new folder which I'll call render descriptions. I'll jump inside that folder. I'm going to right click and create a new text document, and I'm going to name this shot02.txt and bring up shot2.txt. Now if we jump over in Houdini to our outputs, I do still have this mantra 1 render node. This is going to be the render node that I use for all of our rendering when we're using our render script. So the first line I'm going to add is our render node is equal to /out/mantra1. We know we're dealing with shot 2, so let's set our shot name equal to shot02. And I'm going to set our file base equal to c:\projects /td_volume_2 / renders. The camera for shot 2 is going to be our shot 2 camera, so it'll be /obj/shot02. And we need to find out our start and our end frames for shot 2, so let's jump into Houdini. Let's have a look through shot 2 camera. I'm going to switch into wireframe. And I know that the animation doesn't actually get going until around frame 220. So I'm going to render from probably 219 onwards. So I'm going to set the start to 219. I'm going to render shot 2 all the way up until our ball has left the frame, and then I'll give a few extra frames after that. So I'm going to render up to frame 300, and that's just to give us a few extra frames before, since we may have lights and shadows still moving in the shot, and we may wish to hold for a few frames before we cut to our next shot. So I'm going to set the start to frame 219 and the end to frame 300. With those global settings for shot 2 in place, I'm going to go ahead and start on our render passes. So I'm going to create a new render, and let's take a think about what do we have in shot 2 in terms of render passes. Well, we've got our character and we've got our stage, so we're going to need a series of passes for our character, we're going to need a series of passes for our stage, and then we're going to need a series of shadow passes as well. And what lights do we have interacting in this shot? Well, we've got our main spotlights coming down, we've got our secondary spotlights coming down. They're affecting both the stage and our character. Then we've got our character specific lights, the rim lights, the fill light, and the bounce light for the character, specifically the rim lights for shot 2, the bounce light is for all shots, and the fill light for shot 2 on our character. So we're going to need a huge amount of passes for the character, a few passes for our stage. We're also going to need shadow passes for the main spots and shadow passes for our secondary spots. If I jump over to the Photoshop, we can see that we're dealing with our character and our set, and we're dealing with our main spotlights, secondary spotlights, and these character lights. So we can see the passes. If you want to refer back to this diagram, these are the passes that we're rendering. So I'm going to jump back to Houdini, and let's start out simple. Let's start out with the set, so our stage. So I'm going to start out by setting our objects and our objects to our stage. And the reason I'm rendering out the stage, and rather than specifying the ladder and the pool, is simply because we only see the stage in this case. So I'm going to set the objects equal to the stage. The lights in this case, well, let's start out with our secondary spotlights. So I'm going to specify that we've got secondary spot 1, secondary spot 2, and secondary spot 3, which if we jump back into Houdini and over to the object context, we can see we've got secondary spot 1, 2, and 3. So I specified those as our 3 lights. And I'm going to create a diffuse pass for those lights for the stage. Now our object name, I'm going to set to set, and that's simply because when we're rendering the stage in shot 3 and shot 4, we're rendering the stage, ladder and pool and grouping them together with the name set. So to keep to that convention, I'm going to call the stage set in shot 2 as well. And I'm going to use a light name of secondary spots. So that's the diffuse pass for those lights, but you also recall those lights are also emitting specular light. So I'm going to copy all of those lines, paste them again, and I'm going to simply change our pass over to specular. So now we've got a diffuse and a specular pass for our secondary spotlights on our stage. We also need a diffuse and specular pass for our main spotlights on our stage. So let's create a new render. The object is going to be our stage. Lights are going to be our main spot 1 and our main spot 2. The pass is going to be diffuse. Our O name is going to be set, and our L name is going to be main spots. I'm going to copy all of this, and I'm going to paste this and set our pass over to specular. So there are all the passes for the lights that are illuminating our set. You'll recall we only have our main spotlights coming down illuminating the set, and our secondary spotlights, and they've now got a diffuse pass and a specular pass because both of those sets of lights emit both diffuse and specular. So now let's move over to our character, and we know our character is illuminated again by the main spotlights and the secondary spotlights. So I'm going to grab all of these passes, copy them, I'm going to drop down a few lines, paste them, and I'm going to start out by replacing the object with character and the object name with character, but leaving our lights, pass, and light name the same because we know we need diffuse and specular passes for both secondary and main spotlights when dealing with our character. So let's set our objects to character. I'm going to double click on that, Control C to copy, then double click on stage, Control V to paste that out, double click on stage, Control V, double click on stage, Control V, and for our object name I'm going to replace that out with character as well. So that's going to give us our passes for our character for the secondary spots and for our main spots, both diffuse and specular on both. But we also need to take into account the specific character lights, our rim lights, our fill light, and the bounce light for our character. So let's jump down and create a new render. Objects is going to be our character again. The lights in this case is going to be our character bounce. So let's hunt down and find this is our character bounce, which you recall is our distant light, the red light coming up from the floor. We need to make sure we get him in a pass. And you may ask yourself, well, why am I rendering out our character and not including that ladder mask that we created in the previous video? That's because we're not going to see our ladder in this shot, so there's no need to include the ladder mask in this particular series of passes. So we do need our character bounce. The pass is going to be diffuse. Character bounce only emits diffuse. The object name is going to be character, and the light name is going to be character bounce. We can now move on to get our character's rim lights in place. So I'm going to do a new render. The object is going to be our character. The lights in this case are going to be our character rim A underscore shot 2, since we're dealing with shot 2. If you recall, we set up our character's lighting rig and made it look at a particular camera and then duplicated that off 2 times for shot 3 and 4 to look at other cameras. We're rendering shot 2, so we need to make sure that we make our character's light rig look at shot 2 by making sure that we specify the underscore shot 2 version of our character's light rig. So it's going to be character rim underscore shot 2 and character rim B underscore shot 2, and we need a diffuse pass for those. The object name again is going to be character. The light name, in this case, I'm going to call this character rim. And we need a specular pass for those lights as well. So I'm going to copy those, paste those, and create a specular pass. We also need a diffuse pass for our character fill. So let's create a new render. Object is going to be character. Lights is going to be our character fill underscore shot 02. The pass is going to be diffuse. The object name is going to be character. And the light name is going to be character fill. So that's all of the light passes that we've got. We also now need to take into account our shadow passes, which lights in this shot are casting shadows, our main spotlights, and our secondary spotlights. And you recall back to when we were talking about shadows and shadow passes, we're going to have one shadow pass per light per shot, which means that we're going to have all of our objects in that shadow pass. So we're going to have a shadow pass for our main spotlights, and in that pass we're going to have both our character and our stage. And we're going to have one shadow pass for our secondary spotlights. In that pass we're going to have both our character and our stage. So I'm going to come down, I'm going to create a new render. In that render, the objects I'm going to specify are going to be our character and our stage. The lights for this one is going to be our main spot 1 and main spot 2. What pass are we rendering? We're rendering a shadow pass. The object name is going to be shadow. Since we're dealing with shadow passes, I'm going to give this an object name of shadow so that we get a shadow folder that this pass is placed in. And the light name is going to be main spots. Finally, we need a shadow pass for our secondary spots. So I'm going to Control-C to copy this, Control-V to paste. Again, it's going to be for our character and stage. The lights in this case are going to be secondary spot 1, secondary spot 2, and secondary spot 3. The pass is going to be shadow. The O name again shadow, but the light name in this case is going to be secondary spots. And that's all of our passes for shot 2 in place. So I'm going to go ahead and save this file. I'm then going to go and save this as, and save this out for shot 1. And I'm going to go ahead and delete out everything except for our first render pass and our global settings so we can quickly edit these for shot 1. So for shot 1, we're going to be rendering again using our Mantra 1 node, but in this case our shot name is shot 01. Our file base will be the same, but our camera is going to be shot 01, and we're going to render from frame 1 to 220. If you recall, when we set up that shot, we set it up to take from frame 1 to 220. Now, what objects do we have in shot 1? Let's flick over to shot 1 and take a look. We've got our stadium, and we've got our audience. Now, when we're rendering the stadium, we're simply rendering the stadium on its own. When we're rendering the audience, we've got a few considerations to make. The fact that the audience is made up from not just one object, but actually made up from 5 objects, audience column 0 through to audience column 4, means that whenever we're rendering the audience, we need to specify all 5 of those objects. And we need to specify our stadium mask object that we created in the previous video to make sure that the audience is masked out correctly by the stadium. So let's go ahead and get just the stadium passes created first. So our object is going to be stadium import, which if we take a look, that's the stadium geometry. And what lights do we have illuminating the stadium? Well, we've got our bleachers bounce light, which is the red light coming from underneath, and we've got our bleachers top light, which was the greyish blue light coming from above. They're the only 2 lights that are going to illuminate the stadium. If we jump back down here, we can see the stadium illuminated by bleachers bounce and bleachers top, but is not illuminated by the audience ambience or audience rim. So let's set up our stadium import and let's illuminate this with our bleachers bounce. And the pass will be a diffuse pass. We will give the object the name of stadium and the lights the name of bleachers bounce. Now copy this, Control-C, drop down, paste this with Control-V. Again, we're dealing with our stadium. In this case, I want to use the bleachers top light. Again, a diffuse pass. Again, the object name stadium, but in this case, the bleachers top light. So they're the only 2 lights that are affecting our stadium. We now need to go ahead and create all of the passes for our audience. Well, the audience is affected again by bleachers bounce and bleachers top. It's also affected by its rim light, which needs both a diffuse and a specular pass. And it's affected, since we're in shot 1, by that special ambience light that we created, which needs a diffuse pass. And then we need to go ahead and set up our shadow pass for shot 1. So let's go ahead and set up our first of our audience passes. This will be the most complicated of all the audience passes, because once we have that in place, we can copy and paste for all the others. So what objects do we have? Well, we're going to have all of our audience columns. So if we jump over to Houdini, just to make sure I get this spelled exactly right, I'm going to double click, Control-C to copy that, jump over here, and Control-V to paste that in. So we've got audience column 0, Control-V, audience column 1, 2, 3, through to 4. Let's make this take up full screen so we don't get anything wrapping around. We also need our stadium mask object in place so that if case the audience do slip behind some of the benches, they're going to get masked out by the stadium mask object we set up in the previous video. What lights are we going to include? Well, I'm going to first render out the bleachers bounce light, the red distant light from underneath. We're going to be using a diffuse pass. I want these objects to all be called audience, and the light name is going to be bleachers bounce. So now we've got our bounce in place, we can Control C to copy this, Control V to paste this and set up a pass for our bleachers top light. So bleachers top, again a diffuse pass. Again, our objects and our own name are going to remain the same since we're still dealing with the audience, but the light name is going to be bleachers top. We now need to come in and set up for our rim light rig, which if we come down and take a look, we can see that our audience rim lights are named from audience rim 1 through to audience rim 6, so we're going to need to include all of these lights in the rim light pass. So I'm going to Control C to copy this, drop down Control V. Our objects are going to remain the same. Now our lights in this case are going to be all of those rim lights. So that's going to be audience rim 1, Control C to copy, through to audience rim 6, so audience rim 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We're going to be rendering a diffuse pass. The object name again is audience, but the light name in this case is going to be rim light. I'm going to Control C to copy this, drop down Control V to paste, and give ourselves a specular pass also on these lights because these lights emit both diffuse and specular. So we now need to create our audience ambience. So I'm going to Control C this one that has only a single light just to save us from deleting out a whole load of stuff. So again, we're dealing with our audience objects, but the light in this case is going to be our audience ambience light. If we jump over into Houdini, we can see our audience ambience light. That is this directional distant light that is attached to our camera for shot 1. So audience ambience, the pass is diffuse. The O name again is audience, but the light name in this case I'm going to name ambience. With that in place, we now only need to concern ourselves with the shadows for shot 1, and the shadows are only being cast by our bleachers top light. So I'm going to grab this render. I'm going to drop this in. We don't need our stadium mask in this case. We do need, however, our stadium so that we're casting shadows between our audience and our stadium. So I'm going to put in our stadium import object. What lights are we casting shadows from? That would be the bleachers top. What pass are we doing? We're doing a shadow pass. The object name is going to be shadow, and the light name is going to be bleachers top. If we save out this file, with that we have set up all of the passes for shots 1 and shots 2, and hopefully you can see that this is a lot quicker going in and typing all of these out in a description file than going in and manually setting up all of these passes and rendering them out by hand. In the next video we'll take a look at setting up shots 3 and shots 4. Thanks a lot.